guys. Okay. I'm about to get ready to go soon. Just give me a second. Having stomach problems. It's like just fresh 7 in the morning. Get up since 5 a.m. Stupid stomach ache. Oh. Is this what cramps feel like for girls? Oh man, I hate this. Okay. Okay. Howdy, howdy. Good morning, everybody. Oof. So, today we are going to go over how to do research, fact checking even when you're feeling quite lazy and you just woke up at 5 a.m. in the morning. So, usually when I wake up, I listen to YouTube videos. I like to have, like, just generally something to generate some sort of direction for my thoughts in the morning. So, I'll watch different things, maybe some news, maybe some science stuff, maybe some religious stuff, just anything kind of just wake me up in the morning. So in this case, I just wanted to watch a news video, but I happened to notice something that was kind of like okay, I know I found this like a couple months back, and I found plenty of research to this, so I can't fathom how you could not find this, and you claim that you found nothing to support the other side. So, this is going to be a great example of what happens to me when I'm on Facebook or talking to people or watching something where they'll say something and I'm sitting there and I don't want to say anything because I don't want to be a dick. But in the back of my head, I'm like, I've read enough evidence to support the opposite conclusion from what you're saying. So I know you may have found something that says that you're correct. But I found evidence that proves that there is enough science to be done on the other side without an agenda and without a budget to fund it. So, in this case, we're going to explore something that I found pretty hilarious. I'm going to let you guys kind of watch the beginning of it, and I'm going to stop it and kind of discuss. Well, I'll stop it when it's appropriate. How about that? So, like always, enjoy the show, and have a good time. Ooh, almost forgot. I have to turn on the speaker. Alright, there we go. So, as always, like and subscribe. Well, I mean, you don't have to, but I do if I at least get a comment on something.
For the sake of structure, the more interesting stories were placed later in the video, meaning you degenerates will just have to eat your COVID-19 vegetables before that delicious dessert. On screen are the current corona figures as of the last day of editing, which has left the United States, Brazil, and Russia in podium positions. Although it's expected to take 1 to 2 years for a vaccine to be sufficiently tested, drug trials have however found promising leads that have been able to alleviate some of the symptoms. No members of the SWAG News team are qualified to be giving medical advice, but for the love of fuck, don't do anything without the advice of a medical professional. This includes the simple 2-step cure that was left on my housemate's windshield, which was essentially just drinking a shit ton of alcohol. A seemingly underreported element of COVID-19 has been the strange effect it's been having on both children and young adults. According to doctors in both the United States and Europe, younger people are experiencing seizures as a result of coronavirus, disproportionately more than any other age demographic. Additionally, children who contracted corona are coming down with a condition called multi-system inflammatory syndrome, which can be explained as an overreaction of the immune system in fighting the virus. Experts can't
Remember that a couple videos back, I specifically talked about vaccinations and how they cause a cytokine storm. That is a flood of an immunosystem response in where your body basically starts destroying itself because it cannot identify friend from foe, and thus it's overreacting to the stimulus caused by an infection. That's similar to this illness, by the way. That is literally what they just described, is a cytokine storm. So, just again, how my brain works.
Pinpoint the cause at this time. However, one of the leading theories is that more inexperienced immune systems don't know how to properly combat the virus. One of the most fascinating phenomena.
Again, another aspect for why people say that autism can be caused by an overstimuli of the immune system caused by taking too many vaccinations at too young of an age, before your body is able to naturally identify these viruses within their own system. If your family has never come into contact with this thing, there's likely nothing genetically for you to be able to identify this virus from. So it still has to process the same 2-week process by which an immunity response is formed. Still has to be formed in a vaccination. The thing is that the vaccine is a dead form of the virus or of the disease that you're trying to combat. And so the idea is that you send a weakened form of this thing so it can't overwhelm the body, but it still can appear enough in the bloodstream to trigger an immune response, and thus your body can draw up and create a defense preemptively so that should it come into contact with something that is related to this strand of virus in the future, it will later cause a immune response to kick in, and it'll be able to quickly identify and create and generate a defense mechanism against that virus. But that is based off the idea that you've pre-infected the person, thus giving the body a way of pre-identifying it and thinking of how it can quickly genetically match with that subject and destroy it. So again, that's still based off of having a normal immune response. If you overwhelm an immune response, it's not going to work properly. You're going to cause issues even if the virus is dead. The virus may be dead, but your immune system is still acting like it's a real virus, which means that it still has a live reaction. Just because a vaccine's fake does not mean that your body treats it like that, which means you could still have damage to your physiological system from going through the full immune response. Getting off topic, but again, this is how my brain works. It is very easy for me to listen to one sentence and be able to draw up an entire archive of things that I've learned about that whole subject.
What's come out of the COVID-19 pandemic has been how nearly every single person on the face of the earth has their own theories on how the virus came into existence. One of the most prominent and outlandish of which attempts to connect the situation to the erection of 5G infrastructure, which led me down a long rabbit hole that never seemed to end.
I don't know why it didn't seem to end for him. It literally took me 5 seconds to figure this out, how to research this. But here, this is an example of what I do to everybody's post on Facebook or when I talk to them in conversation. Listen to this, and then we're going to see what I do in response.
Let's jump in. The theory linking 5G and COVID-19 was originally suggested by a Belgian doctor in a local newspaper back in late January, when a general practitioner by the name of Chris van Kerkhoven pointed out that 5G cell towers had been built around Wuhan, and therefore they could have been related to causing the virus. Kerkhoven later said, "I have not done a fact check, but it may be a link with current events. This is how the theory started. I wish I was fucking kidding. It would be like saying that because the number of people who drown in swimming pools strongly correlate with the number of Nicolas Cage movies per year, that the two are somehow connected. Nevertheless,
his argument thus is that correlation is not causation, which is an accurate way of looking at information when presented statistically or in association with an event. But at the same time, you can miss the truth by not looking at the causation and correlation and asking yourself, could there be something environmentally affected that this causes to the environment that thus makes it more likely for this other thing to happen? Which again, if you look into 5G, you can eventually make an argument that yes, if you set up 5G towers and then release a virus into a local population, it's going to allow the virus to ravage the people far more. But we'll get into that in a second after this guy's posts some false research.
this baseless claim, which has since been deleted from their strongly correlate with the number of Nicolas Cage movies per year, that the two are somehow connected. Nevertheless, this baseless claim, which has since been deleted from their online website, has circled around internet platforms ever since. An Australian-based poll, published on the 18th of May, found that 1/5 of 18 to 34-year-olds believed that 5G was being used to spread COVID-19. The same amount of people in the group also believed that Bill Gates was involved in the spread of the virus, and that the entire outbreak was to force people to get vaccinated. On an unrelated note...
Okay, we're not going to get into that in that video because I've already proven in an earlier video that that's exactly the point. Like, Bill Gates in November was talking about how COVID could cause a pandemic and why we need to create better pandemic policies between nations and rely on international policies to protect us from an infestation or pandemic striking multiple nations at once. So Bill Gates has been all over this, and he was in this from the very beginning, pushing all of his vaccinations. Again, look at the HoloLens. I think Bill Gates in general is a shiesty mofo. But I'm not going to get into that. If you guys want me to, leave a comment. I'll get into it fine. I can literally do a 1-minute research on that. It's not that hard to find these things out. That's what frustrates me so much. I don't understand how people don't see the other side, because the thing, it's just so out there. But that's why I think that there's something algorithmically, in the algorithms. Basically, the point is that I think Google has algorithms in place based on personalized information research patterns that people have. Perhaps that's a conspiracy theory, but there's evidence that has been released that perhaps Google is more shiesty than we think, and that they do control what it is that we read and look at in order to put us into different camps. So perhaps that's probably an element of it, confirmation bias by algorithm. But again, I find it frustrating that this guy could not find these very easy to find things. That either means he was not looking for the right things, and thus he was literally just looking, does 5G cause issues to the body? Or he was looking up, did Bill Gates push COVID in order to push vaccinations? That's basically what I think, and then he did a Snopes check and was like, okay, fine, whatever Snopes says goes. That's how I feel this went down, and that's why I get frustrated. Let's continue.
A report by the United Nations in 2017 ranked the Australian education system as one of the worst in the developed world. But let's get back on track. One UK-based broadband company alone reported 68 incidents in less than a month of people abusing their employees, vandalizing their buildings, and even setting fire to their towers. One apprentice network engineer was even suspected of contracting coronavirus when a man spat in his face after accusing him of importing the infection. In 1 week, there was a recorded 54. One of the most was the news T, which has produced over 10 stories on why 5G is harmful since the start of 2019. Upon further investigation, it turned out that the news site was entirely owned and funded by the Russian government, and
okay, how is it that Al Jazeera, which is completely connected to certain cells of terrorist networks, that should go unmentioned because I don't want to cause a controversy. Again, how is Al Jazeera constantly referred to me as a reliable source of news, but RT is not a reliable source of world news? Okay, whatever, but fine. Let's just hate the Russians because the Russians are evil commies.
An article by the New York Times back in May of last year detailed how Russian officials have been employing a misinformation campaign in order to catch up on their own 5G infrastructure. Most other posts were not nearly as convincing, with one...
Because the Russian government totally controls every single news network and every single element of it, because they're just such evil fascists. Imagine the pompous presumptions that Americans have of Russian culture. Literally, we assume that their SOTOR is going to be on board with what the government's going to be doing. I don't believe that RT is completely on board with everything Putin says. They like Putin, but they don't always support Putin. That is one of the reasons why I like RT. But if you don't watch RT all the time, you're not going to know the moments where they're kind of critiquing Russian diplomatic policy. But whatever.
Claiming that the citizens of Wuhan had begun tearing down 5G towers around the city, but long-time viewers may recognize that this was a surveillance tower taken down during a protest in Hong Kong.
Chinese version of CCTV, which is linked to facial recognition, and whatever they were doing towards being able to identify their individual citizens, which has been going on for the last few years, and which the UN had been looking into because they like China so much. I wonder why. Have developed this process, and the UN was very interested in how China was implementing this sort of identification process. So these citizens are destroying these towers so they can't be identified and taken in by secret police. But another aspect of this is that in the release of files, I already did literally, it took me 5 minutes to find all the material I needed. Then I just read it real quickly and was like, oh, this is so dumb, I'm going to make a video about it. When we look into 5G, you're going to understand what 5G is. When you look at what 5G is, you'll understand why destroying each individual CCTV tower, the China at least, you are protecting yourself, but also by destroying any tower that happens to be linked itself from the entire network of them. So if they do selectively pick a certain amount of these, because again, it's most likely that they set up the 5G towers and they're also using internet connections in order to distribute the feed from the cameras. So if you destroy the 5G towers, you prevent the cameras from being able to activate and send the signal across to the mainland for the secret police to go and watch and survey you. Especially whatever AI algorithms that you're using, it would be unable to utilize that sensory information in order to develop a feedback system to predict where you're going and predict who you are. So again, it's strategic to destroy this if you understand what 5G is. That is how you prevent force a totalitarian government. You want to pick back up with the feed here? We're just going to be stuck for a minute? Wow. Alright. There we go. We back on track now? Can we get back on track? I like to get back on track. I think anybody who's here wants to get back on track. There we go. Alright. Well, let's continue.
Of last year. In terms of whether 5G technology is safe, experts in the field have found no cause for alarm. There have been thousands of studies into the health effects of previous generations of the technology, and even some of the most damning reports have been inconclusive at best. As always, viewers can find links to the sources used down below. In terms of how leaders around the globe have been handling the pandemic, none have been quite as irresponsible as President Jair Bolsonaro of Brazil.
Gonna skip it. Yeah, Brazil has bad policies all around, but whatever. And the guy does look like Palpatine.
Supporters of one of the leaders of the reopen protests in South Carolina tested positive for corona, as well as 80 protesters from a similar event in Wisconsin. Supporters of the reopen movement suggest that the economic damage will be far more deadly should the nation continue the lockdown, while those who support lockdown measures often blame the lack of social safety nets, which have allowed other countries to more easily support citizens who cannot continue to work. It would be easy to assume that the COVID-19 outbreak would leave the biggest mark in the history books of 2020, but it wouldn't be hard to also give that title to the still ongoing protests in Hong Kong. The demonstrations, which have been raging in one form or another since March of last year.
Did I already pass it? Oh shoot. Either way.
To fully understand the situation, but put simply, Hong Kong was essentially leased to the United Kingdom for 99 years, during which time it became a democratically led economic powerhouse in the region. In 1997.
Yeah, okay. Wow. I guess I went over it. Either way. So, here's how you look into something. First thing I did was, wait, he found no evidence of 5G having an effect on the immune response. Okay, well, first thing I was going to do was just type in 5G. Jeez, I need to stop hitting all caps. 5G. And then I was going to start typing in 5G. Does it affect genetic development? Then I thought about it. I realized that was kind of pointless. So what I was going to do instead is this. Just typed in, instead of 5G, I looked up 1G. Because again, if you're going to understand how it is at the beginning, you should look, at this stage, you should look at the beginning. So 1G refers to the first generation of wireless cellular technology. These are analog telecommunication standards that were introduced in the 1980s. Here, let me shuffle this around real quick so you guys can read this too. At least more of it than I did before. There you go. So, the idea is that this is any network that utilizes radio signals connected to radio towers which broadcast the signal over an area. 5G, thus, is the use of the same cellular networks, the same kind of radio signals, but in high frequency and in smaller areas. The idea is that they are divided into small geographical areas called cells. And in these cells, you can hold more frequency interactions. So that's internet and telephone networks and the use of those in radio waves to distribute information between areas. And also, one should wonder, okay, so how does radiation send information across a radio signal? Again, understanding the idea of how radio waves work to send information across distances gives you a better idea of how it could possibly affect the biology of organisms that are under such high frequency load. The main advantage of these new networks is that they have a greater bandwidth, thus they can hold more information, and they can download more. Basically, again, they can take in more information and distribute more information in this small area. Due to the increased bandwidth, it is expected that the new networks will not just serve cell phones like existing cell networks, but also be used as general network service providers for laptops and desktop computers, competing with existing ISPs such as cable internet. And also will make possible new applications to IoT and M2M areas. Current 4G cell phones will not be able to use these new networks, which will require a new 5G-enabled wireless device, something that is able to harness or work with the higher frequency radio waves. These higher frequency radio waves have a shorter range than the frequencies used by previous phone towers. They require smaller cells or smaller areas by which these cell phone towers are constrained. They can't broadcast over a large distance. So to ensure wide service, 5G networks operate up to 3 frequency bands, low, medium, and high, giving you the full treatment. A 5G network will be composed of networks of each type of cell, each requiring different antennas, each given a different trade-off of download speed versus distance and service area. Man, they're really trying to just bathe you in those freaking high-frequency waves. 5G cell phones and wireless devices will connect to the network through the high-speed antenna within range at their location. So again, the lower band will be more what we're used to. The higher bands will be working with the more advanced phones. But the idea is that we're working with high-frequency waves. So once I did that, I went back to Google, old handy authoritarian Google, and I went, well, what are radio waves? I typed in what are radio waves, and me, because I'm being lazy, decided, well, let me just look at Wikipedia. So Wikipedia, radio waves. These are radio waves. They are a type of electromagnetic radiation, which then I just went, oh, what's that? Herpaderp. Copy. And then I went, electromagnetic radiation with wavelengths in the electromagnetic spectrum longer than a flared light. So basically, we can't see them, but they still are real like light, and just like light can cause cancer, what do you think else can cause cancer? But I wasn't going to shut my mouth. A wavelength of a radio wave can be anywhere from shorter than a grain of rice to longer than the diameter of the Earth. Like all other electromagnetic waves, radio waves travel at the speed of light in vacuum. They are generated by electric charges undergoing acceleration, such as time-varying electric currents. So basically, if you're interacting with electric charges undergoing acceleration, or an electrical current, in your genetics, what's possibly going to happen if you're constantly electrocuting your genes? Naturally occurring radio waves are emitted by lightning and astronomical objects. Remember all those experiences in religion with, storms and weird planetary events? Just saying. These things aren't just created out of a vacuum. These things happen because, again, science is pretty accurate. But if you look at the science, what scientists have concluded is not accurate to the science that they're actually providing. Radio waves are generated artificially by transmitters and received by radio receivers using antennas. but they can also be received by organisms because we have the ability to receive electromagnetic frequencies. Radio waves are widely used in modern technology for fixed and mobile radio communication, broadcasting, radar, and radio navigation systems, communication satellites, wireless computer networks, and many other applications. Different frequencies of radio waves have different propagation characteristics in the Earth's atmosphere. Long waves can diffract around obstacles like mountains and follow the contour of the Earth. These are called ground waves. Shorter waves can reflect off the ionosphere and return to the Earth beyond the horizon, called sky waves, while much shorter wavelengths bend or diffract very little and travel on a line of sight, so their propagation distances are limited to the visual horizon. So the idea is that different waves affect you differently. Why do you think they want to hit you from 3 different qualities of these high frequency waves? Ground waves, sky waves, line of sight. To prevent interference between different users, the artificial generation and use of radio waves is strictly regulated by law, coordinated by an international body called the International Telecoms Union, the ITU, which defines radio waves as electromagnetic waves frequencies arbitrarily lower than 3,000 gigahertz, propagated in space without artificial guide. The radio spectrum is divided into a number of radio bands on the basis of frequency, allocated to different uses. And so the idea is that each radio spectrum is separated into a different category because they interact with each other, and they can cause a disproportionate amount of disruption and loss of information if they interact with that. That makes it unable to be usable. Again, if the body is able to react with radio waves, I wonder what will happen to us if that's what happens to information being shared on the same frequency. But what is an electromagnetic wave and radiation? Well, electromagnetic radiation refers to the waves, or their quanta or photons, of the electromagnetic field. Remember, the frequency is higher than in flared light, but it still has the effect like light. So they're still photons. They still travel at the speed of light. So it refers to the waves that propagate or radiate through space, carrying electromagnetic radiant energy. This includes radio waves, like I was saying, microwaves, and flared visible light, ultraviolet light, X-rays, and gamma rays. Classically, electromagnetic radiation consists of electromagnetic waves, which are synchronized oscillations of electric and magnetic field. That's all an electromagnetic wave. All a radio wave is the oscillation of electric and magnetic fields. In a vacuum, electromagnetic waves travel at the speed of light. The oscillations of two fields are perpendicular to each other and perpendicular to the direction of energy and wave propagation, forming a transverse wave. The wavefront of electromagnetic waves emits from a point source, such as a light bulb or an antenna, is a sphere. The position of an electromagnetic wave within the electromagnetic spectrum can be characterized by either its frequency of oscillation or its wavelength. That helps you set up the radio wave, the frequency of the oscillation of that radio wave. The electromagnetic waves of different frequencies are called by different names since they have different sources and effects on matter, and that's important. They have different sources and effects on matter. In order of increasing frequency and decreasing wavelength, these are radio waves, microwaves, infrared radiation, visible light, ultraviolet radiation, X-rays, and gamma rays. So, radio waves are underneath microwaves, which makes you think that maybe that's no damage, right? Because infrared radiation technically is just seeing heat emanate from people, usually when you think about it in fiction at least. Microwaves, though, if you really think about it, we cook food with that. Radio waves, they're supposed to be weaker in a sense, but that's not true. They just have higher wavelength, less effect, but if it was more immediate, radio waves could really mess you up. Electromagnetic waves are emitted by electrically charged particles undergoing acceleration, and these waves can subsequently interact with other charged particles, exerting force on them. EM waves carry energy, momentum, and angular momentum away from their source particle and can impart those quantities to matter which they interact. Electromagnetic radiation is associated with those EM waves that are free to propagate themselves, radiate, without continuing influence of the moving charges that produce them, because they have achieved sufficient distance from those charges. Thus, EMR is sometimes referred to as the far field, In this language, the near field refers to the EM fields near the charges and current that directly produce them, specifically electromagnetic induction and electrostatic induction phenomena. In quantum mechanics, an alternate way of viewing EMR is that it consists of photons, uncharged elementary particles with zero rest mass, which are quanta of the electromagnetic force, responsible for all electromagnetic interactions. So photons are in everything. Quantum electrodynamics, and that kind of goes into faith. What are photons? Light. What is God? Light. God created all things. His will sustains all matter within creation. Thus, light sustains all things for creation. You see it applied in electromagnetic forces. Electrodynamics is the theory of how EMR interacts with matter on an atomic level. Quantum effects produce additional sources of EMR, such as the transition of electrons to lower energy fields in an atom and black body radiation. The energy of an individual photon is quantized and is greater for photons of higher frequency. Let me reread that for emphasis. The energy of an individual photon is quantized and is greater for photons of higher frequency. What is 5G? Higher frequency. Higher frequency electromagnetic waves. So again, this relationship is given by Planck's equation, E equals hf, where E is the energy per photon, f is the frequency of photon, and h is the Planck's constant. A single gamma ray photon, for example, might carry approximately 100 times the energy of a single proton of visible light. The effects of EMR upon chemical compounds and biological organisms depend upon the radiation's power and its frequency. The EMR of visible or lower frequencies, i.e. visible light and flared microwaves and radio waves, is called non-ionizing radiation because its photons do not individually have enough energy to ionize atoms or molecules or break chemical bonds. Only that is within a certain element, and I'm going to go ahead and pull that up so we can get into that in a second. The effects of these radiations on chemical systems and living tissue are caused primarily by the heating effects from the combined energy transfer of many photons. In contrast, high-frequency ultraviolet X-rays and gamma rays are called ionizing radiation, since individual photons of high frequency have enough energy to ionize molecules and or break chemical bonds. These radiations have the ability to cause chemical reactions and damage living cells beyond that resulting from simple heating and can be a health hazard. So again, we're going to look into non-ionizing radiation, which refers to any type of radiation that does not carry enough energy per quantum to ionize atoms or molecules. That is, to completely remove an electron from an atom or molecule. Instead of producing charged ions when passing through matter, non-ionizing electromagnetic radiation has sufficient energy only for excitation, the movement of an electron to a higher energy state. In contrast, ionizing radiation has a higher frequency and shorter wavelength than non-ionizing radiation. It can be a serious health hazard. Exposure to it can cause burns, radiation sickness, cancer, or genetic damage. Using ionizing radiation requires elaborate radiological protection measures, which in general are not required with non-ionizing radiation. The thing about this, though, is that we're talking about the idea that this is over in an open environment. If you contain somebody into a small environment and burst them with radiological rays, you can still affect them. The region at which radiation becomes considered as ionizing is not well defined, since different molecules and atoms ionize at different energies. The usual definitions have suggested that radiation with particles or photonic energies less than 10 electronvolts eV is considered non-ionizing. Another suggests the threshold to be 33 electron volts, which is energy needed to ionize water molecules, which would be inside of us. The light from the sun that reaches the earth is largely composed of non-ionizing radiation, since the ionizing far ultraviolet rays have been filtered out by the gases in the atmosphere, particularly oxygen. Remember, the claim about global warming is that the atmosphere is thinning, and also that and there's another aspect of that which goes into the idea of the global pole shift theory, which is that our magnetosphere is also very weak right now, and thus we are not actually rejecting a lot of the ultraviolet rays that are coming to our environment. One could also say that that could be generated by the fact that we use so many radio waves and broadcast through our magnetosphere in order to get radio waves in, but that's not here and there. The remaining ultraviolet radiation from the sun causes molecular damage, for example sunburn, by photochemical or in free radical producing means. Need a drink. Different biological effects are observed for different types of non-ionizing radiation. The upper frequencies of non-ionizing radiation near these energies, which is much of the spectrum of UV light, are capable of non-thermal biological damage, similar to ionizing radiation. Again, the upper frequencies of non-ionizing radiation near these energies, radio waves, are capable of non-thermal biological damage similar to ionizing radiation. Right there on the wiki, everybody. Health debate therefore centers on non-thermal effects of radiation of much lower frequencies, microwave, millimeter, and radio wave radiation. But we understand that 5G is not low frequency, it's low area. It has low area coverage, but high frequency load. The International Agency for Research on Cancer recently stated there would be some risk from non-ionizing radiation to humans. Again, evidence that radio waves can cause damage to the body. But a subsequent study reported that the basis of the IARC evaluation was not consistent with observed incident trends. AKA, it wasn't what they wanted, so it's inconclusive what the research found, because that allows them to not have to open any new policies in order to restrict the use of 5G or 4G networks. This and other reports suggest that there is virtually no way that the results on which the ARC based its conclusions are correct. And this again leads us to the next problem. I type in high frequency radio waves into the Google, because I'm lazy. So continuing on the research. High frequency HF is the ITU designation for the range of radio frequency electromagnetic waves between 3 and 30 megahertz. It is also known as a decameter band or a decameter wave, as its wavelengths range from 1 to 10 decameters. Frequencies immediately below HF are denoted medium frequency, while the next band of higher frequencies is known as the very high frequency VHF band. The HF band is a major part of the shortwave band of frequencies, so communications at the frequencies is often called shortwave radio, because radio waves in this band can be reflected back to Earth by the ionosphere later in the atmosphere, also known as the skip or skywave propagation. Again, we've been messing with this stuff for a while, so the information's already out there before the last 5 years when people were like, oh, 5Gs might be dangerous. Go back more than just the last 5 years, and you'll find that there's a steady research that shows that how you use radio waves matters. These frequencies are suitable for long-distance communication across intercontinental distances and mountainous terrains which prevent line-of-sight communication. The band is used by international shortwave broadcasting stations, aviation communications, government time stations, weather stations, amateur radio, and citizen band services, among other uses. It also is quite useful if you have AIs which you need to utilize that network in order to distribute information from. Propagation characteristics. The dominant means of long-distance communication in this band is skywave, skip propagation, in which radio waves directed at the angle to the sky refract back to the Earth from layers of ionized atoms in the ionosphere. By this method, HF radio waves can travel beyond the horizon around the curve of the Earth and be received at intercontinental distances. However, suitability of this portion of the spectrum for such communications vary greatly with a complex combination of factors, such as sunlight, darkness at the site of transmission and reception, transmitter-receiver proximity to solar terminators. You have the season, you have sunspot cycles, you have solar activity, and you have the polar aura, which again goes back to the idea of how our magnetic sphere can be affected by external environmental factors, which can then affect how radio waves work inside of our environment for high frequency. At any point in time for a given skip communication path between 2 points, the frequencies at which communication is possible are specified by these parameters: the maximum usable frequency, the UMF, the lowest usable high frequency, the LUF, and a frequency of optimal transition, the FOT, FOT. The maximum usable frequency regularly drops below 10 megahertz in darkness during the winter months. That's basically information on how it's weakened and stuff depending on whether or not it can have access to other elements to travel through. But the general gist is that high frequency waves can affect your body, and they also work largely through your environment in order to distribute themselves. So environmental factors have a heavy effect on them. That's why they're saying they need a lot of these in a small concentrated area in order to make sure the service is not lost. What they're really not saying is that this is because the high frequency waves that they're using are going to be affected by the ambient environment much more than what we're already using, because the waves themselves are not as stable in that kind of short use. I'm not explaining that in a very sophisticated sense, but I didn't go to college for this shit, so pardon my French. Anyways, so the general gist is what I ended up doing is I typed in, okay, so we understand that the general gist of what 5G is an electromagnetic wave. There. That's all you need to know. 5G, 1G, G, magnetic waves. There you go. So you type in electromagnetic waves and genetic development straight into the Google. Just right there. Just right there. Just 5 seconds. 5 seconds. You click search. Oh. Oh. What is this? A link? A link? Wait. That doesn't seem like it's a link from a... that might not be a link from, a credible source, but we'll look at it. That's an educational source, so maybe, that might be it. It's 2015, it's a little bit before when we would want it to be the most updated, but at the same time, it's just before it would need to be updated in order to lie about it, so this might be kind of good to pull up too. Oh! A science channel. Okay, let's maybe pull up that too. Oh, a government site. Let's maybe pull up that. A research one? Let's maybe pull up that. Plant responses to a high-frequency electromagnetic field. Man, I haven't even found that. If plants are reacted to it, maybe biological organisms that eat plants would react to it or be affected by the plants that are affected by it. Maybe we should look at the full article. The DNA has a fractional antenna in electromagnetic fields. Let's maybe look into that. I mean, that's not technically a credible source, but we also have this one right there. The effects of electromagnetic radiation on human reproduction. Let's just look over a few of these. Sorry, got a little excited there, but you have to understand, I get frustrated by this. The genetic effects of electromagnetic waves. Now, you have to buy this ebook or buy the paper, which is annoying. But if you really want to prove something, then buy it. Find out. I'm not going to spend $30 for it. What do I look like? Do I have a Patreon? You guys want to donate to me, I guess. I'll start buying science articles and I'll read them online to you guys. The genetic effects of electromagnetic radiation or electromagnetic waves can be detected by different test systems. The mutagenic effect of ionizing radiation can be developed on the levels of DNA and or chromosomes. In numerous researches, efficiency of micronucleus assay, alkaline single-cell gel, electrophoresis, chromosomal aberrational tests, and FISH technique, and there are different combinations for the detection of ionizing radiation-induced genotoxic effects are discussed. Also, some of the molecular biological approaches developed in the last years are presented. They don't have it. I will have to download the preview PDF. What? Oh, yeah, no. I don't necessarily trust it. But, I mean, it could be worse. What the heck is this? Is it a PDF? No, I'm not even gonna try. Screw it. This is why I don't like science. You guys make us have to go and jump through hoops just to learn stuff. Anyways, so there you go. You got one link there if you want to pay for it. I can understand not paying for it, so screw that link. But let's go into this one, which seems like it's more promising. Researchers develop radiogenetics. New method triggers gene expression with radio waves or a magnetic field. In Troy, New York, at its most basic ways to find out what something does, whether it's an unmarked circuit breaker or an unidentified gene. Hold on. Oh yeah, no, perfect. You guys are centered. Good, good. Flip its switch and see what happens. New remote control technology may offer biologists a powerful way to do this with cells and genes. A team at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute and Rockefeller University, always freaking Rockefeller, the unaffiliated places, is developing a system that will make it possible to remotely control biological targets and living organisms rapidly without wires, implants, or drugs. Oh my god. But 5G has no way of affecting the body? I freaking hate you people so much. I hate this world. In this technical report published today in journal Nature Medicine, the team describes successfully using electromagnetic waves to turn on insulin production to lower blood sugar in diabetic mice. Their system couples a natural iron shortage particle, ferritin, to activate ion channels called TRPV, such that when the metal particle is exposed to a radio wave or magnetic field, it opens the channel, leading to the activation of insulin-producing genes. Together, the two proteins act as a nano machine that can be used to trigger gene expression in cells. What? 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 No! No! You don't just do that. Do you people understand how much ambient metals are in our environment or in our food or in our water that can just react with the freaking stuff they're trying to create? This is worse than I actually thought. Like, if what they're saying is possible here is possible, I really don't want 5G to be created right now. I actually think that conspiracy theories might be true that 5G is created just to cause mental instability in the human population. That's kind of now coming into my head because of this stuff, and now I understand how people get into that rabbit hole. The rabbit hole the other guy couldn't even find, but again, maybe it's hard just to hunt for rabbits if you never learned how to study one. Anyways. Jesus, activating insulin with radio waves. The use of radio frequency-driven magnetic fields is a big advantage in remote gene expression because it is non-invasive and easily adaptable. Ooh, yeah, sure. By whose agenda? You don't have to insert anything. No wires, no light systems. The genes are introduced through gene therapy. You can have a wearable device that provides a magnetic field to certain parts of the body, and it might be used therapeutically for many diseases, including neurodegenerative diseases. It's limitless at that point. A wearable device that provides an electromagnetic field to certain parts of the body that can affect your body biochemically. What is your cell phone but a giant device with an electromagnetic field? But okay, whatever. Can't have any damage. No effect, people. This is all fake science. All fake science. I'm totally just coming out of thin air here. Other techniques exist for remotely controlling the activity of cells or the expression of genes in living animals, but these have limitations. Systems that use light as an on and off signal require permanent implants or are only effective close to the skin, and those that rely on drugs can be slow to switch on and off. This new system, dubbed radiogenetics, uses a signal, in this case a low frequency radio wave. What? But low frequency radio waves can affect genetics. Right, Wiki? Right, Wiki? Right, Wiki? Science! This is why you don't trust experts at all, at any level. Because the science changes every freaking day. So look into how things work systematically in causation. That's why causation may not mean correlation all the time, but it does matter. Anyways, this new system uses low frequency radio waves or a magnetic field to activate the particles. They in turn prompt the opening of all that other stuff. Basically, as it travels through the channel, it switches on a synthetic piece of DNA that the scientists developed to turn on the production of the downstream gene, which in this study was the insulin gene. In an earlier study, the researchers used only radio waves as the on signal, but in the current study, they also tested out the related signal, a magnetic field, which could also activate insulin production. They found it had a similar effect as the radio waves. The method allows one to wirelessly control the expression of genes in a living animal and could potentially be used for a condition like hemophilia to control the production of the missing protein. Two key attributes are that the system is genetically encoded and can activate cells remotely and quickly, says Friedman, or the scientist looking at it from Rockefeller, We are now exploring whether the method can also be used to control neural activity as a means for non-invasively modulating the activity of neural circuits. This can't possibly be used for nefarious actions, right? You bag of dicks. Exposure to radio frequency, electromagnetic waves, alters acetylcholine gene expression, exploratory, and motor correlation linked behavior in male rats. Basically, it just makes them neurally, logically unable. They're disoriented neurologically. Humans in modern society are exposed to an ever-increasing number of electromagnetic fields, EMFs, and some studies have demonstrated these waves can alter brain function, but the mechanism still remains unclear. Unless you read the previous article, which explains it quite clearly. Hence, the study sought to investigate the effects of 2.5 gigahertz band radio frequency electromagnetic waves exposure on the cerebral cortex, acetylcholine oh my god, activity in their mRNA expression level, as well as the locomotor function of anxiety-linked behavior in male rats. Animals were divided into 4 groups, namely Group 1 was control without any exposure to radio waves. Group 2 were exposed to the 2.5 GHz radio frequency waves from an installed Wi-Fi device for a period of 6 and 8 weeks. The results... Groups 2 for 4, were exposed to the other situation. The results revealed that Wi-Fi exposure caused a significant increase in anxiety levels and affected locomotor function. Furthermore, there was a significant decrease in their activity of that chemical reaction in their genetics. So there was a co-mechanic increase in mRNA expression level when the rats were exposed to Wi-Fi when compared to control. In conclusion, the data showed that long-term exposure to Wi-Fi may lead to adverse effects such as neurodegenerative diseases, the very thing these people want to cure, using the very thing that this thing says causes it. Okay, as observed by a significant alteration in the gene expression by some neural behavioral parameters associated with brain damage. So it causes brain damage, but it can also heal brain damage. Cool. And they think it can heal brain damage because they want to control it. But the uncontrolled use of it is completely fine. Totally proven to not cause any damage by every single scientific person who earns money. Pardon my French. Extremely low frequency electromagnetic waves aren't considered as a real carcinogenic agent, despite the fact that some studies have showed impairment of DNA integrity in different cell lines. The aim of this study was the evaluation of late effects of 100 Hz and 5.6 MT electromagnetic fields applied continuously or discontinuously on the DNA integrity of viral cells assessed by the alkaline comment assay and by cell cycle analysis. Normal vitreal cells were exposed to extremely low frequency electromagnetic fields for 45 minutes. The common assay and cell cycle analysis were performed 48 hours after treatment. The results showed that exposed samples presented an increase in the number of cells with high damaged DNA as compared with non-exposed cells. Quantitative evaluation of the common assay showed a significant increase of the tail lengths, the quantity of DNA in tail, and all of tail moments, respectively. Cell cycle analysis showed that the increase in frequency of the cells in S phase, proving the occurrence of single-strand breaks. Oh my god, so it wrecked the absolute hell out of these cells. The most probable mechanism of induction of the residual effects is the production of different types of reactive oxygen species. Conclusion: the analysis of the registered comment indices of the cell cycles showed that an extremely low frequency electromagnetic field of 100 Hz and a 5.6 MT had a genotoxic impact on cells. So in short, low frequency hurts you. High frequency hurts you. Radio waves hurt you. But they don't, 'cause science. The extremely low frequency electromagnetic fields are omnipresent in human life, being generated by common appliances, electrical conductors that cross the populated areas or the walls of houses, medical devices used in the treatment of different illnesses, electrical cars, pretty much a lot of things. Both in the cases of medical devices and of the electrical components of cars and trains, the common generated frequency of that is that of 100 hertz. Even though the patients or passengers are exposed for a short time, usually under 45 minutes to 45 minutes, the deserving personnel are subject to prolonged exposure. Also, the combined treatment of 100 hertz magnetic field and X-rays have increased the survival time of haplotherema implanted bipic mice as compared to magnetic field or X-ray treated groups, suggesting the possible uses in oncotherapy. The exposure of different cell lines or organisms to electromagnetic fields had produced the bulk of data that were sometimes contradictory and didn't allow concise or clear conclusions about the effects of magnetic fields on biological systems. The International Agency for Research on Cancer has evaluated scientific data and said that it might be possibly carcinogenic, and the worrying but contradictory epidemiological or experimental data about the possible genotoxic effects of this kind of field suggests that possible carcinogenic effects require an enrichment of the pool of experimental information and the deciphering of its action mechanisms. Carcinogenic processes have 3 developmental stages: the initiation, the promotion, and the propagation, I believe, is what I was going to say. Yeah, and the progression. The first stage, tumor initiation, begins when the DNA in a cell or population of cells is damaged by exposure to exogenous or endogenous carcinogens. If this damage is not repaired, it can lead to genetic mutations. The responsiveness of the mutated cells in their microenvironment can be altered and may give them a growth advantage relative to natural cells. The possible carcinogenic effect of low frequency and intensity electromagnetic fields are still under debate, the data being controversial. Studies in this field suggest that exposure to low frequency and intensity electromagnetic waves could alter DNA integrity, which could trigger the initiation of carcinogenic processes or could accelerate the development or spreading of already present cancers. Also, it was suggested that chronic exposure to EML could be involved in the development of some neurodegenerative diseases by production of reactive oxygen species, aka it causes your brain to slowly kill itself because it's overproducing and over-responding to a stimulus in the environment that it can't fight against. The other researchers identified no effects on the integrity of DNA in the conditions of exposure to electromagnetic fields. The aim of the study was to test if, in effect, there are any differences between continuous or discontinuous extremely low frequency electromagnetic fields on the DNA integrity of normal viral cells in order to evaluate the possible disruptions that could lead to mutagenicity. The evaluation of cells of the extremely low frequency electromagnetic fields was assessed by alkaline comic array and cell cycle analysis. So, in short, yeah, it hurts you. Derps. But let's keep going, because, people don't actually think so. Okay, this is just people talking about if there is research into it. This is another one. Possible effects of radio frequency electromagnetic field exposure on the central nervous system. And again, we found this in a span of 1 minute. Technological advances of mankind through development of electrical communications have resulted in exposure to artificial magnetic fields, blah, 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 blah. I think this is the same thing as what we were reading before. In particular, in use time of smartphones, they've become a necessity for modern people. It's steadily increasing. Social concerns and interest on the impact of cranial nervous systems because of these fields are increased when considering the area where mobile phones are used. However, before discussing possible effects of radio frequency electromagnetic fields on the human body, several factors must be investigated about the influence of EMFs at the level of research using in vitro or animal models, veto cells. Scientific studies on the mechanisms of biological effects are also required. It has been found that RF and EMF can induce changes in central nervous system nerve cells, including neuronal cell apoptosis, death. Changes in the function of the nerve melanin and ion channels, basically how your cell distributes the patterns and signals in order to react to its environment stimuli, and also it can act as a stress source in living creatures, which can also affect genetic ability to reproduce, because that causes release of cortisol and stress hormones, which can cause a negative effect of toxicity to the body in long doses. Possible biological effects of RF and EMF exposure have not yet been proven, and there are insufficient data on biological hazards to provide a clear answer to possible health risks. Therefore, it is necessary to study the biological response to RF EMF consideration of the comprehension of exposure with regard to the use of various devices by individuals. In this review, we summarize possible effects of EMF exposure. Yep, and it's basically the same thing. I like this though. It's a good graph. In fact, I'm gonna save that. Add that to the little thing. Slides sheet. Yeah, this is basically going over the same set of research they were looking into there. So beforehand, they were looking if it causes direct. Oh my god. So here's the thing. They constantly talk about how correlation is not causation, right? But what they do in order to disprove autism or disprove that vaccinations or that radio waves can cause damage is they use correlation is causation. They literally make the argument that, okay, people with leukemia can't get it from vaccinations or from high-frequency radio waves because there's no correlation between this and this. But correlation doesn't mean causation, which means that something can still be stimulated by something happening in another area. I could rob a bank, and because I robbed a bank, I prevented somebody from getting to their job because of the resulting roadblock that was stopped in order to go and arrest me. I did not directly cause that person to go and prevent work. So if they said, I did not get to work because of the bank robbery, that's not true. They were stopped by the roadblock that was started because of the bank robbery. Correlation is not causation, but it's still associated. So association can still be derived from things being within the same area of effect. These things are still in the same area of effect, which means it's still scientifically accurate and reasonable and rational to assume that things like vaccinations and things like high-frequency radio waves can affect the body. But again, there's no evidence of it. Affect electromagnetic waves on human reproduction. Electromagnetic radiation from the natural environment, as well as the use of industrial and everyday devices, constantly affecting us. We keep hearing this spiel every day. Although the mechanism cannot be explained, electromagnetic waves exert an influence on human reproduction by affecting male and female reproductive systems, the developing embryo, and subsequently the fetus. Knowledge concerning this problem is still being expanded. However, all the conditionings of human reproduction still remain unknown. The study represents the current state of knowledge concerning the problem based on the latest studies, but it does affect reproduction. Go ahead and read more if you guys want to look at it. It takes 1 minute to look up. DNA is a fractal antenna in electromagnetic fields. Purpose: to review the responses of DNA. Really, I gotta burp right now. Okay, whatever. Purpose of DNA to electromagnetic fields in different radio frequency ranges, and characterize the properties of DNA as an antenna. Again, as a receiver of radio waves. Materials and methods. We examine the published reports of increased stress protein levels in DNA strand breaks due to EMF interactions, both of which are indicative of DNA damage. We also considered antenna properties such as electronic conduction within DNA and its compact nature in the nucleus. Results. EMF interactions with DNA are similar over a range of non-iodizing frequencies, i.e. extremely low frequency and radio frequency ranges. Oh! Answer to our question yet again. In the supportive of the conspiracy theory, it seems. There are similar effects in iodizing range, but the reactions are more complex. Conclusion: the wide frequency range of interaction with EMF is a functional characteristic of a fractional antenna. That means your DNA receives radio waves, and DNA appears to possess two structural characteristics of fractional antennas: electronic conduction and self-symmetry. These properties contribute to greater reactivity of DNA with EMF in the environment, and the DNA damage can account for increase in cancer epidemiology, as well as the variations in the rate of chemical evolution in early geologic history, or in current history with the invention of new diseases and new neurological developments that are causing damage to our society. Ironically, in the invention of our new sophisticated age of science and technology. We want this all to be free and constantly distributed around with us, and we have never done the research into it, it seems, because the research right here, the last 5 things we've read, have proved that one video wrong, but he did the research and he found nothing conclusive. I'm sorry, you are either lazy, dumb, or you really have some messed up ways of looking for research, because it's right here. High frequency non-ionizing electromagnetic fields that are increasingly present in the environment are able to evoke a specific response in plants that share many similarities with those observed after a stressful treatment. Plants constitute an outstanding model to study such interactions since their architecture, high surface area to volume ratio, optimizes their interaction with the environment, aka they have the perfect density, their perfect physical nature by which these things interact completely with them. For us, we have different organisms in us, different cell cultures, we have different substances by which our cells are aligned, which are affected by EMF waves, each individually in a different way, and one of them usually caves. For plants, it's different. The whole plant is just one series of different types of cells that are all really just symmetrically the same. It's affected unilaterally as a whole organism, whereas we are affected as different organisms as part of a whole. Anyways, in the present review, after identifying the main exposure devices, transverse and gigahertz electromagnetic cells, waveguide and mode-stirred reverberating chamber, and general physical laws that govern EMF interactions with plants, we illustrate some of the observed responses after exposure to EMF waves at cellular, molecular, and whole plant scale. Indeed, numerous metabolic activities, reactive oxygen species, metabolism, metabolism, and Krebs cycle, pinophosphate pathways, chlorophyll content, terpene emissions, and etc. are all modified. Basically, the entire plant's way of doing things modified, affected, dampened. Gene expression altered. Gene expression is altered, and I'm not going to get into what is specifically goes into that. And growth reduced, and its growth is reduced after low power HF EMF exposure. These changes occurred not only in tissues directly exposed, but also systematically in different tissues. While the long-term impact of these metabolic changes remain largely unknown, we propose to consider non-iodizing EMF radiation as non-injurious, genuine environmental factor that readily evokes changes in plant metabolism. AKA, it's natural in our environment for us to be able to react to this stuff, so let's not freak out about it. Because the research is inconclusive on whether or not it can cause damage, even though it's not iodizing. Even though we have other studies which say that it does cause damage, even though it's not iodizing, but whatever. Since living material is not a perfect dielectric, it readily interferes with EMF in a way that depends upon several parameters, including but not restricted to its general shape, the conductivity and density of the tissue, and the frequency and amplitude of the EMF. The interaction between the living material and electromagnetic radiation may or may not induce the elevation of tissue temperature, thus defining the thermal versus non-thermal associated metabolic responses. In the case of thermal response, the resulting heat dissipation is normalized with a specific absorption rate, the SAR index. This has led to considerable research efforts to study the possible biological effects due to exposure to HF EMF. While the vast majority of these studies have focused on animals and humans because of health concerns with contradictory or inconclusive results, the numerous experiments have also been performed on plants. Plants are outstanding models because they are immobile and therefore keep a constant orientation to the EMF in their specific scheme of development. High surface area to volume ratio makes them ideally suited to efficiently intercept EMF. It is also quite easy in plants to achieve genetically stable plant lines for the selection of species that favor asexual production or self-pollination. Furthermore, metabolic mutants are easily available for several species and constitute invaluable tools to understand the way EMF signal is transduced. Indeed, several reports have pointed out that plants actually perceive HM or EMF of even small amplitudes and transduce them into molecular responses and or alterations of their development scheme. The way that EMF interacts with plants remains essentially unanswered. However, since it can evoke a multitude of responses of plants, they might be considered a genuine environmental stimuli. Indeed, EMF exposure alters the activity of several enzymes, including those of reactive oxygen species, ROSs, metabolisms. So, a well-known marker of plant responses to various kinds of environmental factors. So the reactivity of its metabolism is one of its responses to environmental factors. EMF exposure also invokes the expression of specific genes previously implicated in plant responses to wounding and modifies the development of plants. Furthermore, these responses are systemic insofar as exposure of only small regions of the plant results in the almost immediate molecular responses throughout the plant. Wow, okay, so one area affects the whole area. These responses are abolished in the presence of calcium chelators or inhibitors of oxidate phosphorylation, which implies development of ATF pools. In present review, we describe exposure devices, SAR development methods, and biological responses at both the cellular, molecular, and whole plant levels observed after plant exposure to EMF. We focused this review on radiating HF EMF mainly within the range of 300 megahertz or 3 to 3 gigahertz, and consequently will not address the biological effects of static magnetic fields, SMF, extremely low frequency electromagnetic fields, or HF current injection, since their inherent physical properties are dramatically different from those of high frequencies. Therefore, HF EMF are considered should be viewed through the prism of classical electromagnetic macroscopic electrodynamic phenomena, described in terms of vector or scalar fields. So the idea is that it's more of an environmental effect. I don't want to force you guys to kind of have to watch me read through this whole thing, so let's just try to go to the conclusion. There we go. Conflicts of interest. The authors declare that there are no conflicts of interest regarding the publication of this paper. Yay! Conclusion and future prospects. Increasing number of reports highlight biological responses of plants after exposure to HF EMF on the molecular and whole plant level. The exposure conditions are, however, far from being standardized and illustrate the diversity of exposure conditions employed. However, future work should avoid exposure in near field conditions, i.e. in the immediate vicinity of the emissions antenna, where the field is unstable and difficult to characterize. Similarly, the use of communication devices, i.e. cell phones, should be avoided as emission sources, since it may be difficult to readily control the exposure conditions because of the built-in automation that may overcome the experimental setup. The use of specialized devices, THM cells, GTEM cells, waveguides, MSRCs, etc., in which precise control of exposure condition can be achieved is highly preferable. Sharvokov, recently reviewed the possible interaction mechanisms of EMF with living organisms. While the classical targets interaction with membranes, free radicals, and intercellular regulatory systems have all been observed in plants, a convincing interpretation of the precise mechanism of HF-EMF interaction with living material is still needed. Alternative explanation, i.e. electromagnetic resonance achieved after extremely high frequency stimulation, which matches some kind of organ architecture, have also been proposed for a very high frequency EMF, several dozen gigahertz. However, the reality of this phenomenon in vitro, studied for now only through neural simulations, and its formal contribution to the regulation of plant development have not yet been experimentally established. In conclusion, they propose that light effects on plants arose not only through chemophores, but also through alternating electrical fields which are induced in medium and are able to interact with polar structures through dipole transitions. The possible associated targets of the ratios and aspects of cell production and molecular regulation are also those affected by exposure to HF-EMF waves. It could therefore be speculated that HF-EMF may use similar mechanisms to interact with biological organisms. The target pathways, especially that response, are well known to modulate numerous responses of plants to environmental stress. While deeper understanding of plant responses is still needed, these treatments may initiate a set of molecular responses that may affect the plants resistant to environmental stresses, as already demonstrated in wheat tolerances, for their tolerance levels, and also constitute a valuable strategy and increase plant resistance to environmental stressful conditions. So in plants, electromagnetic waves are useful, but again, this shows that they interact with biological matter on all forms and spectrums, and that, again, is just all I really wanted to do. 1 minute can get you, how long is this video so far? I mean, shoot, an hour. You can waste about an hour reading through enough evidence that radio waves affect biological organisms in more ways than one. But this guy, in 3 minutes, hand-waved everything I just read because he just either didn't find it or he felt it didn't prove what he thought was the accurate truth. And because he doesn't believe in conspiracy theorists, and the belief in 5G is proposed as conspiracy theory, I guess, he ignored all of this research relating to how radio waves and electromagnetic frequencies specifically in and of themselves affect the body, and instead focused on whether or not the 5G, according to Google and Wikipedia, will kill you. Which is not the same thing as looking into whether or not electromagnetic waves, when introduced in the way that they're trying to introduce them, will cause an effect on us. That is the difference, people. This is why this is important. And this is why, when fact-checking, look into both sides and be willing to rethink of how you're questioning what it is you're researching in order to move forward and actually build a reasonable argument. Because the reason why I disagree with a lot of the mainstream things are largely built off of premises like this, that there is alternative research which is not included in the considerations of the mainstream narrative. They just hand-wave it aside because it's inconclusive, and this narrative has more people pushing for it. It's not the same thing as being true. Either way, stay blessed, stay guiding people, stay frosty shepherds. I gotta go pee. Bye.